I feel like a locomotive, sipping, drinking Arizona. Mixtape just around the corner, did a lot in California. Can't wait to drop this on you. Yeah, they gon' have fun with that. Smash like Songam, and my songs gon' break through like a running back.
Good evening and welcome back to the podcast. As always, up to speed with Formula One. Mark Daly and the Ham Dog here to wrap up a somewhat busy week in Formula One. Mr. Hamilton, how's it going tonight, sir?
My friend, happy Diwali. How are you? How is the family? Everything with me is good. It's been a busy week. I find myself migrating more and more to the office and less time work from home. So I think that era of my life that I will always reflect back on somewhat fondly of working out of my basement every day is rapidly coming to an end. But dude, I'm doing great. How are you?
Yeah, good, man. Just like yourself, it's been like a crazy busy week. It's now Thursday night, so that means the weekend is now directly in. It's in the headlights. Let's put it that way. I can see it now. It's the next off ramp to your right, and I'm looking forward. I don't have anything really planned for this weekend, but I'm just looking forward to finishing off some home improvement projects that I started a couple of weeks ago, and then I never got a chance to finish. And the last couple of weekends since I started, I've been busy with other things, so I got to finish caulking and putting the shower stall back together, which was something that really needed doing. But yeah, that's how bad my week has been. Is that I'm actually looking forward to doing like handiwork around the house from the honeydew jar. So yeah. So how about yourself? You ready for the Mexican Grand Prix this weekend? Do you have like your oversized sombrero, or do you have the mariachi band all ready to go?
Yeah, I know a lot of our listeners specifically tailor their menus on a race weekend to the location that we're racing in. And I think I'll probably do the same. It won't be super authentic, but I'll definitely steer my weekend menus towards something resembling Mexican food, or at the very least something resembling Tex-Mex, which I think probably infuriates all of our Mexican listeners, and we've got quite a few of them. But yeah, I'm super excited. I like this race, and I'll share why in a couple of minutes. But you know what? We got a ton of really fun stuff to talk about. And I know the championships, both of them are tied up, but there's still so much going on that I think we can probably stay busy for the next 3 or 4 months. And the funny thing is, man, as I was sitting here kind of putting together the outline for the show, it kind of dawned upon me, and this isn't the first time I've had that realization, but we could do a 45-minute news show 5 days a week. Like, that's just how busy the world of Formula One is. And I feel like we have to cut so much stuff from the show. Like, I cut for every show worth of material we put together, we probably cut two shows worth of content, just because we can't be here for more than an hour and a half, and you're not going to listen for more than an hour and a half. But I think in a perfect world, if we had the ability, we'd probably be banging out 2 or 3 of these a week. So stay with us during the off season, because to me, that's when a lot of the best news comes out.
Yeah, absolutely. And hey, why did you have to bring up the food thing? Because, Mexico, Mexican food, it's fantastic. One of my best friends is from Mexico City. So anytime like I'm in the mood for like Mexican food, I always hit up my buddy Jorge. And it's just like, okay, tell me the latest and greatest. Like where do I need to go around town? Because there's more Mexican places like as time goes on, like up here in Vancouver. But if I want to find out like the latest and greatest, like the best places to go, I'll always like send him a message. It's like, where do I need to go and try? And he'll give me the lowdown. So now that you said that, I'm craving tacos, and it's already like 9:30. We're in the middle of recording, so we're gonna be here for another 90 minutes.
I gotta ask this question: do you prefer hard shell or soft shell?
Soft shell.
Yeah, me too.
Now I'm going to be texting him like, Jorge, right, as soon as this is over, because we're going to be here for the next 90 minutes. My stomach is grumbling, so why don't we just dive right into the show here?
Do it.
I wanted to, before we start getting into the actual meat of the news and stuff like that, I had a couple of really good emails over the last week or so. Just wanted to read these ones out. First one comes from Ryan Vermeulen in Saskatoon. And this is actually from last week. Didn't get a chance to throw it into last week's show before the U.S. Grand Prix. So just to give a little bit of context to that is Ryan's email is talking about Danny Ricciardo. And I'll just read it out. I just saw the video McLaren posted of Daniel riding on a horse to the U.S. Grand Prix with a musician played alongside him. In my opinion, Daniel's putting on a happy face, but I don't really think he wants to do this or is actually enjoying it. McLaren is draining every last drop out of Daniel while they can. In the last 2 years, Daniel's probably quadruples McLaren popularity. McLaren knew what they were doing when they hired him. The amount of social media he does for them is far greater than any other driver for any other team. There's no way that all this extra credit work has not contributed to his mental fatigue. It's not the sole reason for his declining performance, but has definitely contributed to it. Do you see Max, Lewis, Charles, etc., doing numerous videos on a weekly basis and then having to do all these extra stunts during race week? Not a chance. If there is a surefire way to prevent your driver from being totally focused, rested, fully prepared, and in the right mental state of mind to perform at their best, then this is it. Some blame does fall on Daniels. He allows himself to be used to this degree. He's spoken of this before. He's just too nice to say no, essentially. Anyways, I saw that video. My first thought that this was not this was cool, but rather that this is kind of sad. What are your thoughts on this? Do you agree with me? Cheers, Ryan from Saskatoon. So, yeah, I think there's probably a little bit to this. Speaking as well, we were talking about it before we jumped into the studio here, just how insanely busy we are with our own lives, and just trying to get the kids to school, try to take care of this, try to take care of that. And some days, I get to the office to start working. And obviously, I'm not driving a Formula One car, but sometimes I feel mentally drained before the days even started, just trying to get people out of the house and trying to get them to school and all that sort of stuff. So, I think there is something to it. I mean, anytime you're just like dividing your focus, that it's not a bad, or sorry, not a good thing. And I mean, the more you do it, like Daniel does, I mean, that potentially could impact what he's doing. I mean, if you're not focusing, if you're not resting, you're not going to be in that premium spot. But that's kind of interesting. That just maybe I saw the video, but I didn't actually watch it. I saw it pop up in my timeline, but but my initial reaction is like, oh, there's here we are at Coda again. There's Danny in like the big Stetson. He's got the Western outfit on, which looks pretty cool, but it's like almost become par for the course. It's almost like clockwork.
Right.
Thursday at Coda, there goes Daniel wearing the cowboy boots and cowboy hat. So I thought it was a good one. So cheers for that, Ryan. What do you think?
Yeah, super interesting email. Although I admittedly, and I ever since Daniel, because you and I have been doing the show together since he was at Renault, ever since we've
Yeah.
been doing the show and he's been with McLaren, we talked about what a huge marketing boon he's been for that team and that organization. He's
Oh,
wildly
sure. Yeah.
popular in the US. McLaren themselves are widely popular in the US. I think it might be really challenging to draw that direct kind of line between Daniel Ricciardo and his popularity in the US and the popularity of McLaren in the US. Although I don't know, like I feel like obviously he's contributed to it, but I think Lando's also very popular. And I think Zach Brown's done a
Hmm.
really great job of cultivating um, fandom with that team in the US market. That said, though, like I get it. Like he's in a really difficult position right now, which is nobody wants to be a lame duck on a Formula One team and have to face the scrutiny and face the wrath of reporters every single weekend. Like that's a really unenviable position to be in, especially given the
Definitely.
fact that he basically had to negotiate his way out of a third year of a contract that he didn't want to negotiate his way out of. But ultimately, the reason that contract came to an end and the reason he's not going to be driving them for them next year is simply because he's not delivering as a Formula One driver. And it's really unfortunate because he's such a likable guy. But ultimately, this is very much a Daniel Ricciardo problem. And I think McLaren gave him plenty of time. They gave him a year and a half, which is an eternity in the world of Formula One. And he wasn't able to put in the consistently great drives necessary for that team to stay committed to that 3-year deal. And I think it's super unfortunate. And we'll talk a little bit more about Daniel Ricciardo because we've got a story about him later in the show.
Yep.
But yeah, I sympathize for him because it's probably a really awkward position to be in, that you have to go to the track every single weekend to compete for a team that really doesn't want you to be there. And they've already found your replacement for next year. In fact, they found your replacement before you probably even knew you weren't coming back next year. Like, it's not a great situation. The whole thing could have been handled better. But ultimately, we're having this conversation because Daniel Ricciardo didn't deliver as a Formula One driver for the better part of the last 2 years.
Yeah. And there's a comment in the live stream or the chat and live stream on YouTube. The flag stand says, come on, that's what part of what Danny's paid millions of bucks for. Certainly. And I guess the thing is, where do you strike that fine line? Like when do the commitments and what the team is asking become too much? And when does Danny or whoever it is need to, maybe say, that this is, bandwidth is, getting kind of stretched here. And this is coming from someone that I have this unfortunate condition where I can't say no. So I completely understand where Daniel might be coming from, because, I literally have like 4 jobs, a podcast, and all this stuff, to do with my kids. And anytime somebody asks to do one more thing, yeah, could you help me out with this? I'm always kind of like, oh yeah, sure. And then afterwards, I'm like, I should really one of these days maybe just be a little bit selfish and say, yeah, Hammy, I don't want to do this podcast this time. No,
I
I'm just kidding. This
I feel bad asking you to help me move this weekend now, but you've committed, so I do expect you to be at my place at 6 a.m. on Saturday morning.
That's right. Well, that's the problem when you have a pickup truck, right? You need it one weekend a year, and so do all of your friends. But
Absolutely.
I'm just kidding. I don't have a pickup truck. I have an SUV. Anyways, okay. Next email. Just to dive back into the mailbag here, comes from Parker and Danielle from beautiful Bend, Oregon. And their email is, hi, Mark and Mark. We just got back from COTA and understand the choice you two and I'm sure many others made considering the rise in costs. I can confirm that, in fact, the race organizers did a much better job with track amenities, traffic directions, shuttle organizing, and staffing. There's always struggles when you have 400K attendees, but you could tell they worked hard to improve from the chaos of last year, and we weren't disappointed. The race was incredible to watch in person, especially since we assumed there wouldn't be too much drama, let alone 2 safety cars. If anyone's out there wondering if it's worth attending a race after the Drivers' Championship is decided, it most definitely is. Okay, and then he has a question for a future podcast. So we'll just throw it in right now. So, Back to the Future for Parker and Danielle. Sometimes I've heard comments on the show to the effect of, without design restrictions, these cars could be insane. How insane exactly? What would a car look like and drive like? That could basically be anything that fit within the current dimension size, driven by a human and on the ground. I would love to hear what a car without design limits, e.g., fuel type, safety considerations, previously outlawed technology, would be able to do on an F1 circuit. Yeah, I mean that is fascinating. Thanks for the email, guys. I sent a
Yeah,
nice
thank you.
selfie, and Parker and Danielle wearing the big hats. She's wearing the Mercedes T-shirt. Parker wearing the nice papaya orange McLaren shirt. Obviously having the time of their lives, and it's beautiful and sunny there. Like I say, they're big happy smiles, and I'm jealous seeing this picture. But
So happy they had a great
yeah,
time.
exactly. So yeah, thanks for that email. And wow, to address that question, where would I go with
I
that?
I don't
Previously
think
outlawed technology?
I don't know that we're qualified to even start visualizing what a car, not handcuffed by a current technical regulation rule book would look like. But
Hmm.
I think right off the top, wildly more aggressive aero, I think for sure to create
Hmm.
dramatically more downforce. Um, oh man, I don't even know where you would start.
Yeah, I know. Like that is so. I'm gonna go, and I'm not gonna say that this is like the low hanging fruit, but Parker did throw a bit of a. He gave us a bit of an out on this one when he said previously outlawed technology. So I'm gonna dive back like literally 30 years, and I would love to see a resurrection of active suspension that Williams pioneered in the early 90s. I guess late 80s, early 90s. I think Lotus had it too. I think they're the ones that first started developing it way back in the mid 80s, but it was Williams that took it and perfected it. And that was on the car, the Williams FW14B, which is the car that Nigel Mansell drove in 1992. And this is basically a suspension system that would adjust for all the imperfections and changes to the track surface and keep the ride height of the car at its most optimal um, the most optimal heights between the bottom of the floor and the track surface. And if you consider this was on the cars in the early 90s, I mean that was literally decades ahead of its time. I don't think that's too much of an exaggeration. I mean, considering all the amazing tech that these cars have now and have had, for many decades, active suspension is really cool. Just go on to YouTube and just search that up, like the FW14 active suspension, and you can see some like the like there's some videos there of the car like in the Williams garage, kind of like they're doing sort of like a diagnostic or a test on it, and you can see the car just basically moving up and down. It was really cool tech, and you think that this was on the car 30 years ago. what could they do with it now? So that would be one thing of outlawed technology I'd like to see come
That
back.
that
That
is
and normally aspirated engines.
Oh, stop it. Turbochargers are the absolute bomb, and I will fight you to the death about how great turbochargers are. But I think you kind of went down a really great pathway there with the electronically controlled, computer controlled, potentially GPS directed active suspensions. But I think the other two big, really obvious ones are around driver assist, and one of them would be traction control, which every
Yep,
modern road
great
car
one.
has, but a Formula One car does not have, as well as ABS, which every modern road car has, but Formula One cars don't have. And of course, the obvious question is like, Formula One cars are worth tens of millions of dollars. Why don't they have these basic driver aids? And I think ultimately it just came down to the competitive spirit of the championship and making
Sure.
it as much about the drivers as possible. So I think there's a ton of really cool stuff that you can incorporate into the cars, but does it does it relegate the driver to a much less relevant role within the navigation of these cars? Because active suspension is a hugely beneficial tool for creating
Hmm.
grip and traction, especially in corners. And likewise, traction control and ABS really alter the decision making of the driver and really relegate them to a secondary status in a lot of cases. But I think some of the obvious things for me is absolutely unleashing the teams in the wind tunnel. And from an aerodynamic perspective, like for how many years and how many decades did we not have ground effects in these cars, right?
Yeah.
Like we had flat floors, and we could have had ground effects for decades, and we didn't
Hmm.
for a variety of different reasons. But I think if you look at the late 2000s and the aerodynamic packages on some of those cars, they were wild, but they were wild because the championship was running groove tires because they're trying to slow the cars down in the corners, and then they
Oh, hated
unleashed the
groove
designers.
tires.
But I think, yeah, like I think active suspension, I think traction control, I think ABS. Then again, I just think a lot of this devalues the role of the driver in the car. But I think we should probably get somebody on the show one day and put this question to them like, hey,
Yeah.
look, given an unlimited budget and a completely disassembled technical regulations rule book, where would you start and what would that car look like if your cost cap was $500 million and you had
Hmm.
no rule book? What does a car look like? Is it four wheel? Is it six wheel? Is it eight wheel? Does it have tracks?
The
Does it have a
Tiro
fan?
from the
Like,
70s.
yeah, totally. Like, what does it
Yeah.
look like?
Yeah, yeah. The other thing too that I was thinking about, I'm struggling to remember the name now. I'm sure that as soon as I just start describing it, everybody will be screaming at their phones and everything is like, "Daily, you idiot! This is what it is." But what was it that the system that Mercedes had on their car last year, where you push and pull the steering wheel and effectively control the or adjust the toe in and toe out on the
Was that
front.
2020?
Was it 2020 or yeah, it must have been 2020 because
Yeah.
you remember it was protested pretty quickly, and I couldn't help but thinking that if it wasn't sort of well, who's to really say like what was the peak of like Mercedes dominance from 2014 to 2020? I mean, any one of those years, but I guess after so many years that they came up with another potential advantage giver or game changer that everybody started to, especially Red Bull protested right away. I'm just struggling to remember, and I know everybody at home screaming at their phones what it is, but I thought that was an interesting one, and I thought that
Dual axis steering for those of
yes,
you at home.
thank you. I
Yeah,
knew
and
it
it
started
was
with a
very
D.
much the
Yeah.
2020 season. Yeah.
Yeah, I just couldn't help that thinking to myself when it happened, like when it was banned in pretty short order, that if it wasn't after all these years of a Mercedes dominance, would other teams have protested so quickly? And was this maybe um, a set of technology or a technology that was removed and really before they had a chance for everybody to explore it. So I don't know if it was an opportunity missed, but definitely an opportunity maybe not fully explored. So why don't we just
According to
leave it at
Road and
that?
Track, as a reminder or refresher for those of us that don't remember, forgot about it, or weren't watching F1 in 2020, in February of 2020, the Mercedes AMG Formula One team debuted a feature called dual axis steering on its 2020 car, the W11. The technology visible to competitors because it involved physically the driver physically pulling on the steering column to adjust toe angle was a source of
Yeah.
wide variety of analysis and controversy. It was ultimately allowed for 2020 but banned for 2021 and on.
Hmm. There you go. Cool. All right. Well, why don't we just take a quick break here and then we'll come back and we will dive into the news. Plenty of things to talk about. So we'll start doing that after we take a break. So don't go don't go away. Pardon me. Be back in just a moment. All right. Well, welcome back. Well, the next thing that we have on the schedule here is our championship updates. Hammy, do you have the fantasy standings handy here? You ready to go? Last time I asked you, you were all ready to go.
Sure do. I sure do.
Awesome. Let's flip
I
it up.
planned this in advance because the F1 fantasy site is so bad that it unreliably delivers a disappointment in the form of a 404 error. But here it is because we've got tons of movement in the top 10. Number 1 from the UK, Andrew T, 3,908 points. Number 2, also from the UK, Whitman R, 3,892 points. Number 3, Aaron K, 3,885 points. Boy, is it tight at the top. Number 4, also from the UK, Thaddeus F, 3,878 points. From Canada, Janko West, 3,860 points. Number 6, Radic W for Yellow Racing, 3,785 points. Number 7, Marshall W, 3,740. Number 8 from Canada, Adam J, 3,726 points. Number 9, Daffy A, 3,720 points. And number 10, an American cracking the top 10, checkered for Checo, Matthew B, 3,702 points. Just 206 points separate the top 10 folks in the championship so far, and we still have 3 races left. So don't check out on your fantasy team yet like I did.
All right. Nice work, everybody. We'll be sure to keep updating everyone and following that for the rest of the year, obviously. Okay, the Constructors' Championship that was wrapped up at the U.S. Grand Prix last weekend. Red Bull currently with 656 points, Ferrari 469, Mercedes 416, Alpine 144, McLaren 138. So I know that it's all said and done at the top, but certainly interesting to watch that battle between Alpine and McLaren. There could be some movement there. And if you go over to the driver's side, obviously Max Verstappen crowned world champion or confirmed world champion a couple of weeks ago, 391 points compared to 267 for Charles Leclerc, who's only 2 points ahead of Sergio Perez. So you know that Checo is going to be jacked going into his home Grand Prix, only 2 points, well, 3 points away from leapfrogging his Ferrari rival. George Russell, 4th with 218, and then Carlos Sainz, 5th with 202 points. So, I mean, we could see some changing around there in the Drivers' Championship with 3 races to go. So, certainly a couple of things to check out there. All right. Let's get into, I guess, I'm not guessing, but I know is the biggest story of the week. But it's funny, Mark. I kind of think that this is news that is not really news, considering it's been, the old saying, where there's smoke, there's fire. There's been a lot of Audi smoke around that Sauber situation for the longest time. Like it's been months and months and months, and it's just like when the news came this week that Audi announced that Sauber is going to be their strategic partner or whatever it is, the exact terminology, to enter the Formula One in 2026. We were kind of like, well, yeah, we kind of knew this a long time ago, but it's great to get an official announcement, and it'll be interesting to see where they go from here. But the writing on the wall has been kind of there for quite a few weeks and months, and most recently, just a couple of weeks ago, when it was announced that Sauber and Alfa Romeo would not be continuing that sponsorship beyond the end of 2023. So Alfa Romeo Racing will disappear from the grid and revert to Sauber, or whatever it is, whatever name it takes, for 2024 and 2025, and then ultimately 2026. But very cool to see a Formula One car all splashed out in Audi livery, and it's exciting to see another big manufacturer coming into the sport. And I'll just throw this out here while you react. It's just like, now that Audi, now it's real, right? Now we've got something that we can kind of hold on to, and something we can watch and monitor the progression over the years and months ahead, or months and years ahead. So what about Porsche? That's the interesting one. But I'm putting the cart before the horse. Mark, your reaction to the Audi news this week?
Absolutely love this story. I think this is the perfect partnership for a ton of different reasons. If Audi had partnered with McLaren, if they had partnered with Williams, they probably, and most likely and justifiably, would have wanted to impose their branding on those teams. And then we could potentially have lost the heritage and the history of two really valuable British Formula One teams. I think Sauber is a perfect fit, and it's so funny. My buddy Randy mentioned this to me the other day. Like, there technically is no Sauber right now, right? Like, Sauber is the team that's preparing the cars for Alfa Romeo, because it's really the Alfa Romeo
Yep.
Formula One team, even though they're not really lending any technical expertise to the project. They're just paying Sauber to be the F1 team for them. But yeah, we've been calling them
Yeah,
Sauber for
exactly.
years now. But I think this is the perfect partnership. And I think partly it's because Sauber themselves don't really have a strong identity within the sport. And in the business world, we talk a lot about creating white label products, that I'm going to create a product and it's going to be white labeled and then you can sell it on as something else. I think they've been the perfect white label platform as an F1 team, but I think this is a great fit, that Audi is going to get their works team. They're going to get their strategic partner, their technical partner. They're going to be able to start assembling Formula One cars very, very quickly. And I think, given the fact that we have 3 years of runway here, the 2023, 2024, and 2025 seasons, they should be ultra competitive from the jump if they nail that engine formula, because you've got a team that you can work with over the next 3 years to help develop the chassis that's going to accommodate the power unit. And what makes this so special, and we talk a lot about this, is McLaren is always at a disadvantage because they're buying somebody else's engine, and that engine is designed to work with a Mercedes chassis. In this case, you can design a chassis and you can design the engine in tandem. Like, it should be a perfect marriage of the two. And again, it doesn't always work that way, but I just think this is a perfect partnership, that we're not going to lose a heritage team on the grid. Sauber has effectively functioned as that white label product or white label banner for other teams in the past. I think this is
Yep.
this is super exciting, and I don't have anything negative to say about it. But what I will say is, I've been paying an awful lot of attention to the race.com recently, and we talked a
Mhm.
little bit about this on Spaces tonight. And I don't know why or where the race is getting information from that would make them confident about this, but they believe that there's a possibility that Porsche is still going to enter Formula One, which I think we all know is still likely out there, but that their partnership is going to differ than what we had expected it to be with Red Bull, which was with Red Bull, it was going to be a 50% ownership stake, and
Mhm.
collaboratively, they were going to develop a power unit. I still think there's a possibility that Porsche is going to come in, but Porsche wants very much to have a significant majority stake or equal stake in a Formula One team. And then you look around the grid, is that going to be McLaren? Maybe Williams, maybe, but probably not, because I think both of those teams are looking to sell equity and a stake in the team, but probably not lose majority control. But one of the things
Mhm.
that the race has been speaking to is a possible partnership between AlphaTauri and Porsche, and that Porsche
Mm.
would no longer develop its own power unit, but would buy and rebrand power units from Audi. So the Volkswagen Group clearly no longer has the appetite to have two separate Formula One engine projects, but we could see Porsche enter under the AlphaTauri banner. Obviously, the AlphaTauri team would rebrand it, but that would also solve and undo one of the biggest errors and one of the biggest grievous mistakes in Formula One modern history, which is allowing one owner to own two teams on the grid, and just all the negative and horrendous things that does for the competitive integrity of the sport. But Porsche could enter, and I think Porsche and AlphaTauri would be fantastic, because I think AlphaTauri, Toro Rosso, I think they lack a lot of identity as well, and they could be a perfect works
Sure.
team for Porsche as well. So I think this is all really exciting and good news stuff.
Yeah, really it's interesting too when you bring up that possibility that it might be AlphaTauri, because now that sadly Dieter Mateschitz passed away last week, who's to say that without his presence within the Red Bull organization, is that desire there still to have Red Bull and AlphaTauri, or does it, does the
Great
board
point.
or whoever
Great
make
point.
make some decision that because we've talked about it before, like, is that development funnel really working for them? And I'd say not really, because when you look over the years, some of the struggles that they've had. I mean, look at the way that they had to recycle Danny Kvyat, and I'm not going to throw shade at Danny Kvyat.
You
I
just
mean, he went for.
did.
I know, but I'm
I
I'm
just
using him as an
teasing. I was just teasing.
example. I know,
Yeah.
but so he should. I mean, I
Yeah.
deserve it, anyways. But several years ago, you have Danny Kvyat. He's at Toro Rosso. He gets promoted to Red Bull. He has like a series of bumper car incidents, and then he has one at the Russian Grand Prix. in 2016 when he, basically punts Sebastian Vettel into the wall, and then he gets demoted back to AlphaTauri Toro Rosso. Max gets promoted to Red Bull. He wins his very first race at Spain that year, and the rest is history. 2 championships and counting. Anyways, Danny goes off to Ferrari to be a simulator driver or reserve. I think he was just a sim driver. I don't even think he was a reserve driver. Anyways, and then he comes back into Formula One a couple of years after that, or a year after that, because again, they're struggling to find drivers that have enough super license points to put in their cars, and you've got like this rotating roster of drivers going from between these two teams, like Pierre Gasly and Alex Albon and etc. And nobody's really sticking. So it was just kind of a bizarre scenario. And then it just to be, like if you're not, and I guess there's multiple things going on here, and we've talked about it, most recently when we were talking about, possibly getting Colton Herta into Formula One and into AlphaTauri, just the struggles and what he might have to do to get to super license points. But I guess that sort of like underlines what the limitations are with the Red Bull's own system, and then the Formula One's monopoly on the development ladder of F3, F2, F1, etc. But who knows? Maybe that's a good way for them to break it off and separate it, because I mean that's something that you and I have been fairly, I think it's a team that could, like, I mean, if Pierre Gasly and guys like that, I think, are better served at some point in their career getting away from that Red Bull system. Maybe AlphaTauri needs to get away from the Red Bull system to flourish as a team. I know that's
I
kind of like a
totally agree.
long and rambly answer, but
No, I think that's
you know
great.
what
And
I'm getting at, right?
I'll just interject with a couple of things real quick, because just looking at the live chat from the podcast right now, Marshall makes a couple of good points. He's like, Mark, you're contradicting yourself. You're saying that Red Bull shouldn't be able to own 2 teams, but that Audi, the Volkswagen Group, can have Audi and Porsche on the grid. How does that work? Yeah, I get that. I feel like if
Great
Porsche and
point.
Audi are going to
Yeah.
enter, I think they will operate in significant autonomy from one another, and they will be striving to win. That AlphaTauri is never intended to win Formula One Grand Prix. Its role is specifically to develop drivers and to help promote the Red Bull Driver Academy at the highest level. So I think there's a separation there. But more intriguingly, Marshall just added to the chat that there has been some development in the ongoing Alpine, Haas, Fernando Alonso saga. And minutes ago, Chris Medlin has tweeted, confirmed Alpine wins the review. Haas protest is declared null and void. So Alonso will be reinstated in P7 in the US Grand Prix, which will actually have ramifications for both the current Drivers' Championship, and it will have ramifications for the fantasy standings that I just read out a couple of minutes ago, especially if folks had Fernando Alonso on their team. So yeah, breaking news as we talk.
And there we go. We haven't even finished recording this podcast episode, and it's already irrelevant. So
yeah,
I quit. Let's just go. Oh, I was gonna say let's go home. I already am home, so I'm just gonna go to sleep. So forget it. I'm not doing the rest of the show now.
Sounds good.
Marshall, thanks for that and keeping us up to speed. But Fernando, all joking aside, seemed pretty. I wouldn't say confident, but it seemed like, or sure of himself, but I think he had a pretty good feeling that this wasn't ultimately going to go anywhere. And I know that Gunther Steiner's whole thing was that he just wanted clarity from the FIA and from the stewards, because he felt that some situations just weren't, like there was just a lack of consistency, pardon me, in the way that they were applying rules and things like that. So I guess that's fair enough, but it seemed like a little bit of a stretch. I mean, you see their cars getting like the black and orange flag if they have like the end plate of a front wing hanging off, or a piece of bodywork and stuff like that. But that right mirror was certainly very interesting, because it was kind of flopping around, then all of a sudden it disappeared off the side of the car. But I understand like Gunther's point of view, like it is a safety thing, and all cars are required to have 2 mirrors. But I'm pretty sure we've seen this in the past where somebody's lost a mirror or something like that, and they haven't been excluded from the classification. So very, very interesting. So Connie in the live chat is saying that we should start over. So apparently 33 minutes of content isn't enough for Connie. She wants us to keep going. So we'll be going for the full 2 hours tonight rather than the usual 90 minutes. So good evening to Connie and everybody else that's joined in this evening. It seems like it's pretty lively on the chat tonight. So Okay, so we've talked about that. Where do we want to go? Are we done with Audi? Should we go? Oh, let's talk about this one. So this is the stuff that you're all over this, the business side of sports, especially Formula One. 1.3 million TV viewers compared to 2.3 for the NASCAR race last weekend. 440,000 in attendance on Sunday, and they expect to crack 500,000 in 2023 at COTA in Austin, Texas. Those are some pretty big numbers. Obviously, a ways to go to catch up to NASCAR. But your take on this, Hammy?
Yeah, not really a lot to add. Just it's shocking what a different world that we live in versus 7 years ago, where we expected that this race was going to pack up and move on and that we were going to be absent a US Grand Prix once again. And here we are seeing 440,000 people stream into the Circuit of the Americas over the 3-day race weekend. And race
Yeah.
organizers are very confident that with proper accommodations and some logistical work and some new grandstands that they could see 500,000 people stream into that
Wow.
facility next year, which is just absolutely mind-boggling. And as that lovely listener mentioned a couple of minutes ago, this is all
Yeah.
being made possible by
Yeah.
greatly improved logistics. But you want to add something, please
Yeah, I was just
interject.
say, and all those, hundreds of thousands of people clearly into it, clearly having fun, clearly know what the hell's going on the track. I mean, the way that they were reacting like all the time. I mean, this is
Yeah.
becoming like a big thing now. This just isn't like people showing up and just for the novelty and not having any idea. I mean, the sport is growing in leaps and bounds across North America, and the thing is that that impresses me is how quickly that new fans are coming in, how quickly they are catching on to the sport and learning about the nuances and the way that Formula One works. I mean, some of the things that happen over the long term, like the way that drivers move around or teams change name, the change in tech, and just like different championships, you catch up to that in the long run. But I'm just impressed to just the amount of knowledge that people are getting like so quickly. It's really really cool. And then I just wanted to mention something here, just backing up again to the last story about Fernando there. And Connie in the live chat said, clarity from the FIA. Did Mark say that without choking? And, that is kind of an interesting comment and somewhat ironic, because I did read an article from Fernando talking about that clarity in the FIA, or the word that he used wasn't clarity, but he feels that this year, under the presidency of Mohammed bin Sulayem, that there's a lot more transparency, and they feel like they're looped in on a lot more issues than they have been in the past. So, I Connie, I completely understand where you're coming from, and I'm struggling to keep a straight face. But then again, it is interesting to kind of, you know, compare that to Fernando's own comments. Okay, so moving along, this one's kind of timely. Obviously, we got the Mexican Grand Prix coming up this weekend. I think we're only about 13 hours away from the time of recording here on Thursday night, away from FP1. So it's confirmed Mexico City will stay on the calendar at least 3 more years until 2025. And the promoters were flexing on the amount of money that this Grand Prix has pumped into the local economy, the tens of thousands of jobs that it's helped build over the last several years since they've been back on the calendar. And this one's I think it's exciting to see tracks re-up and recommit to Formula One. I mean, even that 3 years is a pretty hefty commitment. And this is interesting too, because Mark, you and I, we've talked about this, maybe not this year, but I feel like it was either last year or maybe the end of 2020, that I don't know if it would be right to say that the Mexican Grand Prix was on life support, but there were certainly lots of question marks around it, because it was being heavily subsidized by different levels of government. And I guess this is probably sort of, I don't remember really where it kind of fits into the larger sort of pandemic picture. But with the way that funds across civilization in general have contracted, well, the question was, are these different levels of government really going to want to continue to subsidize this Grand Prix? But what do you think? You like this? You like this one? You like
I
this
think it's a
news?
Great deal. I love the event. I love the atmosphere. I have different feelings about the track itself, but there are far worse tracks on the Formula One calendar. Obviously, there's some things that make this a very unique and challenging racetrack, but I'll save that when we get to our Mexican Grand Prix preview in a little bit. But I'm happy to see it on the calendar, and I think it's really important that races are distributed geographically and globally. I think it adds a great
Hmm.
deal to the intrigue and the heritage of the sport. And obviously, Mexican fans have embraced the event, and obviously that
Yep.
stadium section itself is now a fan
It's
favorite
unique and it's
on the
cool.
track, and the podium celebrations are exceptional. I'm really happy, and I'm happy for Mexican fans who went a long time without a Formula One Grand Prix and have demonstrated for many years that they're huge motorsports fans. And it
Yep.
also provides a different out. And the other funny thing too, man, is if you flash back to say 2011, we had
Yep.
one Formula One race in North America. We had
I know,
Montreal.
right?
And now we
Yep.
have Montreal, we have Miami, we have Vegas, we have Austin, and we have Mexico City. Like we have 5 races in North America, which is incredible. And all of them are, and I know we haven't raced in Vegas yet, but
Yep.
by
Yep.
every expectation, all of these races are flourishing, absolutely flourishing. So good for Formula One.
It's fantastic, and I love the fact that we're also covering North to South America. If you want to throw Brazil in there as well, I mean, I love Interlagos. I know that it's a bit of an old school track. It's not as flashy and as shiny as some of the newer ones, but the track itself, I think, is cool. It's not as big as wide, but it's got a lot of great corners. It's got a variation and undulating terrain. I think it's really really cool as well. But yeah, I mean, who would have thought even a couple of years ago that we'd have almost half a dozen races in our own backyard, and I think that's fantastic. And certainly, like everyone else, I am super jacked up, to see that inaugural Vegas Grand Prix go in just about a year from now, because it's going to be a spectacle, and I think it's going to be awesome. I mean, I'm jealous if anybody gets to go and watch that one in real life and gets to experience the Formula One race on the streets in Vegas and be in Vegas while it's happening. But I think that even the spectacle from home, I think we're all going to enjoy that as well. Okay, let's take another quick break. When we come back, we're going to talk about Williams and their newly confirmed driver, maybe Logan Sargent, and we'll do that in just a moment. So don't go away. All right, guys, welcome back. We're well into this one now, almost 45 minutes of classic podcasting gold. Asterisks. Well, let's leave that up to you guys. I'm in a bit of a funny mood tonight, so there you go. Anyways, Williams, do they have a contingency plan in case Logan Sargent fails to secure the necessary super license points to get into the car for next year? So they did have a press conference at the US Grand Prix last year saying that Sargent would race for Williams in 2023, providing he can actually obtain his super license. So that means the 21-year-old driver needs to remain in the top 6 of the F2 championship. He is third in the standings at the moment. They've got 2 races left, and he has a 12-point cushion. So I wouldn't say it's kind of like nail biting time for Logan. But certainly the this youngster from Florida, he can't sit back and kind of relax and kind of I wouldn't say phone it in, but certainly he's going to have to be on his game, because that's not really a huge buffer. But they say they do have a contingency plan, but they're not revealing what or who it is. So the obvious comment there is that Logan is their guy, and he's going to be in that car, and they're expecting it completely to happen. But I
The
wonder,
contingency
who
plan
that
is
person.
Nico Hulkenberg. He's
It's
everybody's
it.
contingency plan. He's everywhere he needs to be. He's just readily available. But dude, that said, one I just realized we off the top we may have missed the story about Red Bull, Aston Martin, and agreeing to an
Yep.
F1 cost cap breach deal. So we should probably circle back to that. No pun intended. But dude, we're talking about this driver, Logan Sargent, entering F1 as an American driver because he is an American driver and he was born in the United States. I can't believe we're not more excited about this. That most weeks this would have been the breaking story, but now it's almost secondary news that, yeah, there's going to be an American Formula One team or driver next year for a heritage Formula One team. Like, this is super exciting. Like you said, though,
Yeah.
there's no guarantee he's going to score those super license points, and a lot can happen over the course of 2 races. It'll be a stretch if he doesn't, but my sense is that obviously there's a back burner deal, and it might have been Giovinazzi, although his recent performance in testing was horrendous. But it would probably be Nico Hulkenberg. He's a safe bet, and you can put him in a car. I know he's going to bring it home every single race weekend. But I think we are all very excited to see an American driver at F1. And we just talked about the fact that we could see 500,000 people at COTA next year over the 3-day race weekend. We have 3 races, and now we're going to have an American driver. Now, admittedly, it's coming at the expense of a Canadian driver, and it breaks my heart. And maybe now Nicky will be able to find some time to join us on the podcast and reflect back on his 3-year career in Formula One. But that said, I'm also really excited to see what an American driver can
Mm-hmm.
do for the popularity of the sport. The challenge, of course, is that he's going to be driving for arguably the worst team in Formula One. So it'll be interesting to see how people balance, one, their excitement of having an American driver with the fact that he's going to be driving what should probably be a really poor car. But all that said,
Mm-hmm.
American driver, Formula One 2023, we should be excited.
Oh yeah, totally. And I couldn't help but kind of chuckle there a little bit when you're saying talking about some of those things that American driver driving the worst car on the grid. But I was just thinking to myself, hey, it worked out okay for George Russell. He put in his time, served his apprenticeship,
Great point,
and
man. Great
of
point.
course he already had those existing ties with Mercedes, and he kind of used that and kind of flexed on that a little bit to get that drive with Williams. But he was one of those guys, he just needed to get into an F1 car. He needed to do that time. He needed to he needed to learn this form of motorsport, learn this craft. And I mean, he's doing a pretty darn good job. So I mean, yeah, you might kind of like roll your eyes a little bit. Oh man, you can't, Logan's going to like the crappiest team on the grid, but it's not necessarily a bad thing. I mean, and who's to say? I mean, they're going to get the most time in the wind tunnel. They're going to get the most time for CFD and things like that. So who knows? Maybe they won't be the worst team. I mean, they're not going to be the best team next year, but it's a start, and that's what he needs. He's only 21. He can use that time to his advantage and hopefully do something good with it. I mean, and let's be fair. I mean, Alex Albon has shown that if you're a good driver, even in not the greatest car. I mean, Alex has had some decent rides or runs out there over the course of the season. I mean, I know they've only got like about like 8 points or something like that in the constructors, but he's done some reasonable things in a car that he probably shouldn't be doing it in. So we can watch to
Marshall
see
makes a
what
really
Logan's doing.
great point in the live chat, by the way, speaking to the fact that, hey, Logan's good, but he doesn't scream that he's ready for F1 yet. And maybe he
Yeah,
needs to
good
season
point.
in Formula 2 for another year. My sense is that expectations on the Williams team and on the Williams will be pretty low next year. And you have to then have
Yeah,
that debate. If you're talking strictly Logan Sargent's personal development, what could be better for his development? Another year in Formula 2 where he would
yeah,
probably win a championship based on how the grid's shaping up for next year, or is his personal development and professional development better served by stepping into Formula 1 and racing in 23 or 24 Grand Prix in a Formula
yeah.
1 car on Formula One circuits and dealing with Formula One responsibilities. So I think you could make the argument both ways, but I think if you're a Formula One driver, and Tim said this to me years ago, and so did Nikki, in fact, like if you're given an opportunity to race in Formula One, you do not turn that down because you may
Yeah,
never get
exactly.
another one. You may never get another opportunity. So smart move for
Great,
him.
great point. I was just thinking something very similar, that that this opportunity might not be here one calendar year from now, so you just got to like take it rather than marinating and seasoning for another
And
year in
don't
in
think
F2.
Daniel
So
Ricciardo isn't going to bed thinking about that every night as well. That, hey, we're
oh,
all assuming he's going to be back in 2024, but there's no guarantee he'll ever be back in Formula One as a
oh,
driver.
exactly. I mean, when he climbs out of the McLaren Yas in a couple several weeks from now, that could be the very last time we see Danny Ricciardo climb out or get in and out of a Formula One car in a competitive
Absolutely.
manner, which is a bit sobering. And also, just to kind of like wrap that in, have seen some of Sebastian Vettel's comments this week that his pending retirement is getting a little bit more real now. So I guess the feels are becoming a little bit more intense. It's this. I guess he's kind of realized, yeah, this run, this sport, this lifestyle that's basically been the focus of my existence, all of my adult life, and basically all of my youth, and different formulas and all that is it's coming to an end. And in a couple of weeks from now, I'll be an ex Formula One driver, so I can understand why that might be getting a little bit intense with him. But yeah, I mean, we should talk about Red Bull and Aston Martin and like the cost cap breach. I'm kind of glad that it's not like well, yeah, we did kind of purposely shove it to the somewhere midway down the order here because we've been talking about this quite a bit, and I think there's been other things to talk about. So tomorrow on Friday, they're gonna the FIA is going to make an announcement. So both Aston Martin and Red Bull have agreed to sign and go under an ABA. Aston Martin for the procedural breach and Red Bull for the procedural breach, plus a minor overspend, which I believe is just under $2 million. So it's going to be interesting what comes out in the terms of penalties and punishment, and the fact that it could be a sporting punishment, I think is what they're talking about, which is probably going to be a fine, and then also probably like a reduction in wind tunnel and CFD time. So the thing is, there's already like a reverse kind of scale. So if you win the championship, the team that comes first gets like the least amount of time for like wind tunnel and CFD compared to the team that finishes 10th. And then it kind of there's a sliding scale for a 2 through 9 in between. So Williams is going to finish last in the championship this year, so they'll have like the most resources and time allotted to them. Red Bull will have the least, but possibly they could have that amount of time reduced even further for their naughtiness and all the shenanigans going around the cost cap. But at least, and kind of I say this again, come up, kind of somewhat smirkingly, because we were just joking about that with Connie's comment about the FI and clarity, but they are going to detail what where these overspends and breaches occurred. So we just have to wait here maybe another 10 or 12 hours, and for those of us here on on the North American soil, we should probably wake up and find out tomorrow morning on Friday what's going on, and what the result is. But Hammy, what are you feeling about this one? What's your gut feeling it's going to go, or how it's going to go?
Yeah, I feel like I've said my piece on this, and
Same.
obviously I'm really disappointed in the outcome, but I mean, we talked about this on the Spaces chat, that the outcome is perfectly predictable, that you could have modeled this scenario. You could have 6 months ago said, "Hey, what if team X exceeds cap by Y?" And then you could model it through the financial regulations, and this is where we were always going to come. And what, some teams and some team principals can scream and be sanctimonious and say there should be massive penalties and disqualifications. But that's never how the financial regulations were written. And the teams were involved in that collaborative process. And, one of the listeners, Marshall, in fact, in the Spaces chat, made a great point today that ultimately it was probably resistance from Toto Wolff and Matteo Bonato and some of the big teams that landed us here, because those were the teams that were always most at threat of exceeding the cost cap. And when you talk about Zach Brown writing a letter and
Mm-hmm.
laying out how this should look or how it should be rewritten, it's probably because he was one of the vocal folks that were in opposition to the current financial regulations. But yeah, ultimately the financial regulations has now been demonstrated are toothless, and they will remain toothless until such time that they're rewritten. But they will never be rewritten in a meaningful way until you have Red Bull, Ferrari, and Mercedes, the teams most at risk of exceeding the cost cap, until they're all in line with imposing heavy, significant competitive penalties on these teams. And you know what? We'll probably see a sporting penalty and a financial penalty, but there will be absolutely no risk that Red Bull will lose their 2021 World Drivers' Championship trophy.
Yeah, it's unlikely at most. Like I'm curious to see how this thing is going to unfold tomorrow morning, but at the same time, like I'm not expecting some massive penalty and basically like blowing the whole thing up. I expect it, something to be the form of a fine, and then, like I say, I think it's probably going to be a reduction in CFD and wind tunnel and those sorts of things. Which, if you really look into it, I mean, that could really affect what they can, do with the car for next year and beyond. So, it might be one of these things. It might seem like a little bit of a slap on the wrist, but maybe the what are the what's the word I'm looking for? The implications and the results of that penalty might be a little bit bigger than we realize. Okay, moving along here, I think we've discussed this one to death over the last couple of weeks. Anyways, according to Joe Sayward, that he's feeling that if the Chinese Grand Prix doesn't go ahead in 2023, that it might not come back onto the calendar at all. I mean, obviously, we haven't been racing in China at the Shanghai International Circuit for a couple of years. I mean, like everywhere else, it got chopped because of COVID, and they are on the calendar for next year, but there's no guarantee that this race will go off and happen as as we're expecting. And I kind of, to be quite honest, I kind of have mixed feelings about this one. Should Shanghai disappear from the Formula One calendar? What do you think, Mark?
Yeah, Joe, who should probably be canceled as far as F1 media personalities go. And I felt actually bad putting kind of referencing a Joe Sayward story this week, especially this week, because it's a problematic personality who said some really inappropriate things, especially this week. But I thought this was an
Yeah.
interesting topic. And the point being here that obviously recent political developments at the highest level of government in China seem to suggest that their extremely strict zero COVID policy will
Yeah.
remain in effect next year, which means that getting the entire F1 circus into that country and through quarantine to hold a Grand Prix is very, very unlikely. And I think it just puts this event at risk in the years to come, which is really unfortunate because I would really love to have seen that young Chinese driver that's doing so well for AlphaTauri. And I don't need to say his name, but I would really love to have seen how the crowd would have reacted to have had a Chinese driver on the grid. And then the other thing, too, is next year we're going to have a 24 race calendar. If China drops, what's being reported or speculated is that they probably won't backfill it. So it's very possible that this really deep 24 race calendar that we're going to see next year or that we're expecting to see might actually turn into a 23 race calendar.
Yeah, interesting. Okay. How are we doing for time? Okay, let's talk about this one next, and then we'll head into a break. So Lewis Hamilton on Brad Pitt's upcoming Formula One film that is currently in development says, "quote We're going to make the best racing movie." So Lewis is confident that the team that they put together for this new Formula One film will make the best racing movie that's ever existed. So that is that's a pretty big statement. But if you got like somebody like Lewis Hamilton involved on that, then why not? He was interviewed by motorsport.com. He had the following to say, "quote I'm incredibly excited about it. I mean, what we've been able to put so far together team wise is pretty incredible. I've got Tim Cook here this weekend, which is such an honor to have him with us. Him and his team have been so supportive, supporting my documentary, green lighting this movie. And then you have Brad Pitt, a legend, and you've got Jerry, who's really an incredible legend. He did Top Gun, the original, and Joe is such a huge talent as a director. I have such high hopes for it. I know we're going to make the best racing movie that's ever existed, both visually, and we're going to work on making sure we pull on the heartstrings of all those fans." End quote. So, I mean, if you read the the story on motorsport.com. Lewis is talking about Brad Pitt, producer Jerry Bruckheimer, and director Joseph Kosinski, and screenwriter, pardon me, Aaron Kruger. And the last three were part of the team behind Top Gun Maverick. I don't know how many of you guys out there watched it, but I don't know too many people that didn't go watch Top Gun Maverick. I went and watched it, of course, like everyone else, back at the beginning of the summer, and I loved it. If they can do for F1 what they did with that reboot of Top Gun, which, I mean, the original, although it's kind of dated now, from made in the mid to late 80s, aged pretty well, I would think. But certainly the reboots did it justice, and it's exciting. I mean, if they could do the same thing for Formula One, then sign me up. I can't wait to watch this one. Hammy, you got the popcorn ready, or?
Oh boy, do I. This is, and I don't venture out to the theater for that cinema in-person experience very often, but I think
Same.
this is one that I would find a way to go and see. I think this needs to be experienced on the big screen with that big sound. And I know you've recently got a nice surround sound bar, but I don't think anything
Yeah,
beats the audible experience of
true.
being in the cinema. Maybe we do it together. Maybe we do a listener viewing, but I don't care what anyone says. I'm a big Jerry Bruckheimer fan, and he creates
Yep.
spectacles, and that's what this is going to be. And I expect that this is going to be in a lot of ways a remake of Driven. The oh my God, Sylvester Stallone epic
Yeah, that's
from
right.
2000, 2001, somewhere in there.
I think
And
it's about
I
that. It was
like
about
that.
20 years ago. Yeah, yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
so we'll see, because I think it's very much the same premise, which is Brad Pitt's going to play an aging retired Formula One driver that's going to come back to Formula One. And geez, how old is he now? 58? I don't know. It's good. It should be fun.
Is he that old? I've kind of lost track. I mean, I don't know. I mean, he looks like he's a little bit older, but I can't remember. But it seems like he's been
Let me
around
punch it
from
into the
forever.
old learning machine.
In the
Brad
old
Pitt.
learning machine. But I was just going
Brad
to say, though,
Pitt.
too, that if this one comes on the big screen, considering you were the nice guy that hooked me up with this fantastic, beautiful Sonos soundbar, the least I can do is buy you. I mean, I paid you back, obviously, for the soundbar, but the least I could do is treat you to the movie experience. As long as we go on Tuesday night when it's half price, and then if you're nice to me, maybe I'll even buy you
Hey,
a
we can
popcorn.
go any night of the week if you take me to VIP. I want the recliner. I want the in-theater food service. Oh, by the way, Brad Pitt is 58. He turns 59 on December
Wow.
18th. So he'll be
Wow.
60 by the
Oh my
time
God.
this debuts theatrically, which is crazy.
That is crazy. Holy smokes. I had no idea. I was thinking that I had no idea that he was that old. And I mean, considering we're both in our 40s, isn't much older than us, but
Oh, don't go putting my business in the street. People think I still look 28.
Okay, moving along.
I've never heard you snort laugh before, by the way.
I know. See, these are the things that you do to me. And I'm probably also congested, and then maybe I'm coming down with a cold, or who knows. But yeah, that's a bit of an embarrassing personal moment. Anyways, let's take a quick break. When we come back, let's talk about Lewis Hamilton apparently talking new contract with Mercedes. So Team LH will probably be justifiably excited about that, and we'll talk about that in just a moment. So we'll be back on the flip side, and we'll talk to you then. All right, welcome back. And yes, I'm still struggling to get over the fact that Brad Pitt is 58 years old. And I guess the more I look at the picture that and the article that I'm looking at here, I guess that seems right, but still a little bit of a sobering moment. So apparently, Lewis Hamilton is targeting another multi-year deal in attempt to renew his contract with a Mercedes. So I know that recently, I mean, Lewis has said that he still wants to keep going. Toto said that he's got at least another 5 years in him. And I think that's exciting. I mean, he obviously wants to get that eighth chip at least. I mean, we've noticed and that Lewis himself as a driver is in no way, shape, or form showing any signs of slowing down. He's still one of, if not the best driver in Formula One. Obviously the big question is the car, right? The W13 this year hasn't lived up to expectations. Lewis has struggled a little bit, and his teammate is ahead of him in the constructors championship and the drivers championship. And Lewis, although he's pulled his season together to a certain extent, hasn't really been able to pull back or really close that gap with George Russell. George fourth in the championship, Lewis sixth. And I mean, we're just that's like subterranean positioning for Lewis. I mean, we're used to watching him either leading and winning world championships or in the hunt for them. I mean, that's just the way that it's been for close on to a decade now. And I know what I'm thinking about, what might convince Lewis to stay or to ultimately leave Formula One. But I feel like I'm going to throw this one at you first, Mark, and see where you're going to go with this and see
Thank
how
you.
close to, how we're thinking on this one, whether or
There,
not
there's a
we're aligned on it.
there's a couple of different ways you can spin this, which is one,
Yep.
if he's looking at re-upping on a multi-year deal, it probably speaks to the fact that he's supremely confident that Mercedes is developing a car that could compete for a Formula One World Championship. That's a given, right? The other piece too is he is paid deservedly like a king. In his 9 seasons at Mercedes, it's reported that he's been paid just shy of $400 million US. And that seems appropriate given the fact that he's won 6 drivers titles for them during that time. But if he does re-up, we have every reason to expect that that deal is going to be worth 40 to 60 million dollars per year. So when you factor in the fact that, yeah, the car is getting better and he has the opportunity to compete for an 8th world championship, and he's getting paid between 40 and 60 million dollars per year, kind of feels like a no-brainer if you're Lewis Hamilton to come back. So I'm curious as to whether you have a different angle to this conversation.
Well, the way that I'm kind of thinking that this might go is I see Lewis maybe signing like a 2 to 3 year deal that maybe, and I'm going to use here guaranteed 2 years. I know there's no such thing as guaranteed 2 year deal like contracts in Formula One, but I see it something like Lewis signing like a 3 year deal where 2 years are guaranteed and like the third is like an option or something like that. But that if he does say he signs like this 2 years plus an option, I see that really puts like a lot of pressure on Mercedes now to turn this program around, because let's be honest, this is Mercedes. They're third in the constructors. They haven't won a race this year. I mean, George has been a bright spot. Lewis has been disappointing at times, and at times he's been pretty impressive. But the thing is, they haven't had the car to really challenge, right? So this is not really the Mercedes that we're used to. This is not the Mercedes that they came into the sport a dozen years ago on, after taking over that Braun GP program and rebranding it into the Mercedes juggernaut that we've seen ever since. And of course, the Braun story in and of itself is an incredible story, but it was a one-off. And then when Mercedes took over, it took several years to get it to where it is, and they just, it was a home run right off the bat in 2014, and they were just so far ahead of everyone else. I mean, it's unprecedented and amazing what they did. But I kind of wonder, like, how long will Lewis want to stick around if they can't get the car back to being the best one out there, right? Because at some points, like I feel this is like the one season he'd be kind of like willing to write off, because the more seasons they have like this, it's going to be kind of like damaging to, and damaging is maybe a little bit of a harsh term or harsh word, but maybe it takes a little bit of the gloss off of his legacy, off of his career, right? I mean, this amazing run that he had from 2014 to the end. Well, I mean, let's not go to what happened to the end of last year, but all those championships over the last decade. And then, no championships 2 years in a row now. And then this year, the car not being up to scratch. So how long is he going to want to be like that if they can't deliver a competitive car? And then what if they do, and we end up with a Sebastian Vettel slash Danny Ricciardo, or Sebastian Vettel slash Charles Leclerc situation between George Russell and Lewis Hamilton? I mean, there's no dispute that George Russell is a rising star. He's a proven commodity. He is a hot, young, talented driver that can obviously win Grand Prix given the right car. So, kind of, put two and two together and put all those things together, that given the right car, that potentially George Russell could win a championship. So, you know, there's a lot of things to unpack in those
I
thoughts
would
there, Hammy.
I would add one thing to that let's
Sure.
assume that Mercedes has bottomed out. Like we have to assume that they're going to be better next year,
Oh, I
because
agree.
obviously, and
100%.
some of the things they've said were that they just missed the design this year. All of that said, Lewis has still scored 7 podiums this year, including a run of 5 in a row at one point, and he's finished second 3 times. And of course, those weren't necessarily close second place finishes in terms of competing for a race win, but he's still been very, very competitive this year. And there's no reason to think
Mhm.
that with a slightly better car, he couldn't have been contending or winning races this year. The other thing that I would add too, and Lewis is probably wired differently than Alonso in many ways, but Alonso just signed a 2-year
Every way.
agreement with Aston Martin that is going to take him through 2024. He last won a World Drivers' Championship 16 years ago. 16 years since his last title, and he just signed a multi-year deal with Aston Martin. So
Yeah.
I think you can still be a highly regarded driver and be racing and not having won a title in 16 years. So yeah, I get it. Lewis hasn't won a title in 2 years. I don't think that diminishes anything that he's done as a driver. He still won a race
No,
in 13
no.
consecutive seasons and won 7 titles total.
Yeah, it's just I don't know. Like the thing is with Lewis, I mean, he's got so many things going on outside of Formula One, and I'm not to say that going to say that he's distracted. I think that he's completely focused on what he's doing. I think he loves driving a Formula One car. I think he loves being a Formula One driver, and he loves what he's doing. I mean, it's obvious. I mean, he's focused, and he's still incredible. And I just think that, or I know that that he deserves to walk away from this sport when on his own terms, whenever he's ready. And whatever he goes and does after that, I mean, he's going to be a rock star at that as well. I mean, he's just one of those people that is going to succeed no matter what he does. And I just kind of hope that whatever happens, that we enjoy watching Lewis Hamilton in Formula One for many more years to come. And I hope that as long as he's here, he's got the car that matches up to his capabilities, and not one that isn't quite up to scratch like we've seen this year. Because I mean, I don't think there's any question that he can still. I mean, when it comes to Hammer Time, that is exciting to watch. I mean, I think we were all salivating a little bit last weekend when we saw Lewis Hamilton in front of Max Verstappen on the track. It was kind of like the showdown that we'd all been really craving for this year, but we haven't really had the opportunity to see it manifest on the track too often, just due to the fact that Max has been out of the front of the pack all year long. The Red Bull's just been so much better than the Mercedes that the rematch that everybody wanted to see after 2021 just didn't materialize, which has been, fairly disappointing. All right, let's move along now. What do we have here next? Okay, just you did hint at it about an hour and 15 minutes ago. We do have a one Danny Ricciardo story, because you also said a couple of stories ago that this could be Danny's last season in Formula One. And even though he's saying that he won't be in a Formula One car next year, obviously that he's targeting a return in 2024. And Mark, you so rightly said that's not necessarily guaranteed, but potentially he could land at ESPN for a broadcasting role in 2023. And I think that this kind of seems like a bit of a slam dunk if anyone, in regardless of any sport. I mean, if he was like a basketball player, or a baseball player, or a football player or something, and he was to transition off the field or off the court into the broadcast booth, he would be that personality no matter what sport he was in. So this just seems like a natural fit. But probably, like you're thinking of your own mind, Mark. I'm just kind of wondering, is this 1 year kind of deal at ESPN going to be a little bit longer than 1 year?
Well, it's a slam dunk for everybody that's watching the ESPN broadcast, because I think his analysis would be really great, and he's
Yeah.
personable, and he'd probably be really great with his co-host. I just think the farther he is from the paddock next year, the more difficult it will be for him to ever return. And I know
Yeah.
it probably doesn't feel good for Daniel Ricciardo to assume a test driver position at any team in Formula One, but I think he needs to be on the grid. He needs to be in the simulator. He needs to be getting some practice sessions in. He needs to be around Formula One, because I think the farther he is, the more difficult it will be for him to make a return. Because let's be honest, this guy's also on the wrong side of 30, but I would love
Yep.
to see him in the booth. I would love to see him with a microphone in his hand. I would love to see him interviewing people. But I think for his professional career, he needs to be as close to the racetrack as he can possibly be. And that means suiting up, whether it's in a sim or it's a car for practice and test sessions.
Yeah, 100%. Totally agree with you. Okay, let's get into talking about the race this weekend. Obviously, the Mexican Grand Prix at Autodromo Hermanos Rodriguez, which is a really cool track. Really like it. Like you mentioned earlier, it's got that really unique, cool stadium section, which we don't see anywhere else, anywhere in Formula One. Obviously, anywhere else, anywhere. That's kind of brought to you by the Department of Redundancy Department. Anyways, the one thing I do like is when they do go through that kind of like tight, twisty stadium section, they go through that back around onto the start finish straight. And then they just fly down there into that combo of corners in turns 1, 2, and 3. I mean, it's not the twistiest, most technically crazy track, but it's got something to it that I really like. For me, the pace and the flow of the Grand Prix is really good. I always enjoy watching this one. So just for a little bit of a context, it's a 4.3 kilometer or 2.67 mile long circuit. Race length is just over 305 kilometers or 190 miles long, 71 laps. So last year in the 2021 version, we had Valtteri Bottas on pole. His pole time was 1:15.875. The podium was Max Verstappen, Lewis Hamilton, and Sergio Perez. Max was 16 and a half seconds ahead of Lewis Hamilton, and Valtteri set the fastest lap of a 1:17.0774. If you look at the tire compounds, they're the middle of the range: C2 hard, C3 medium, C4 softs. So this one, I know Toto was saying that this weekend he feels that Mercedes can give Red Bull and Honda a little bit more of a run for their money. I mean, the thing is that I kind of struggle with that a little bit, because it has been such a I would say a Red Bull party, but at least in the last couple of years. So since it came back onto the calendar in 2015, you had Nico Rosberg win in 2015 for Mercedes, Lewis won in 2016. Then in 27 and 2018, you had Max winning both of those times. 2019, Lewis won again. So, I mean, it's kind of been 50-50. And then last year, Max won again because it was canceled in 2020 because of COVID. And I was kind of thinking a little bit more about like Toto's comments, but if you kind of like take that high level view of him saying that that they could run or give Red Bull a run for their money. So I mean, basically, Red Bull's won 3 out of the last 4 times, and the Honda power has just been that much better in the thinner air up at altitude of Mexico City. But Toto makes a good point. He feels that in the tracks that are lower in altitude, at sea level and anywhere in between, that their car is really quite draggy and a lot of wind resistance. So you get up higher. I can't exactly remember off the top of my head. I think Mexico City is something like maybe 2,000, 2,500 feet in elevation. Air gets a little bit thinner, and he feels that the dragginess, the resistance on the aero on the W13 is a less of a factor. So that would be interesting to see if that's how it turns out. And I always kind of struggle when it comes to like the free practice sessions, because everybody's trying different things, and then I really feel that we don't get a good look at how things are going to really compare, how the cars and drivers are matching up against each other until we get to qualifying on Saturday. But what are you thinking, Mark? Is there anything to Toto's comments, or is this going to be just another Red Bull party this weekend?
It will be. It will be. And just to kind of build on what you're saying a couple of minutes ago, we call Denver the Mile High City. Well, Mexico City is a mile and a half up in the sky. It sits 7,200 feet
Oh
above
wow!
above
Oh, I
sea
was way
level. And
off then.
yeah, and I was doing a little bit of research about this track earlier, and it's a track I enjoy, not because it necessarily promotes great racing, but because I really like to soak up the atmosphere. But Nico Rosberg describes the physical characteristics of this track as quote unquote ultra difficult. And that's because he and a lot of drivers have commented on the past about the fact that the tarmac here has ultra, ultra, ultra little grip. There's extremely little grip on this tarmac, which makes it very difficult for drivers to know when they're at the limit in these cars. So they simply don't know how hard to push the car, because if you push too hard and you exceed the limit, the car snaps and you're going to be in the wall, or you're going to be making contact with somebody else. And to add to what you were talking about a couple of minutes ago, the other thing that's really unique about this track is that it's at an extremely high altitude. And what that means is there's far less air pressure. Low air pressure means the aerodynamics don't function as they're intended and designed to do, which means that you have even less grip, which means that you're fighting the car sliding around everywhere. So the aggregate, the tarmac, is ultra slippery. The downforce isn't as effective, which means the cars are already slipping, which means that physically, this is an incredibly demanding track to drive at. And, I've heard Nico Rosberg and a couple of other drivers in the past talk about the fact that you cannot take a breath in some of the corners because the physical exertion and the pressures are so high, combined with the high altitude, that this is an incredibly difficult track. So, when you look at that layout of the track, you look at sector 1, sector 2, sector 3, turns 1, 2, and 3, that's a difficult complex. And, you get down to 4, 5, and 6. Like, it's an incredibly difficult track. And I think it's very difficult for us to understand that without actually piloting a vehicle around this track. So while you look at that outline of the track, it looks like it's a fairly simple track to navigate and to compete on. It's anything but. And like I said, it's because the altitude, the low downforce, and the fact that the track itself is an ultra slippery aggregate. So it's an interesting track. I give the drivers a lot of credit for finishing here. And if you do see people that are missing the kind of the primary racing line. If you see people coming off in corners, it's probably not a surprise. The other big takeaway I have for this track, and we've seen this in the past, is you often see cars overshoot T1, or cars coming together at T1. And it's because it's really, really difficult to choose the braking line or the
Yep.
braking point. And if you make a mistake there, the consequences can be pretty catastrophic for the race. And it's interesting because you have that start finish line and you have the starting grid, but you have this ultra long run, and the cars are absolutely in top gear at the highest RPM, at the highest possible speed. Then they've got to find that breaking point, but you're also trying not to be not broke. I think that's a bad term. You're trying not to break earlier than anyone else on the grid. So as you're approaching turn one at the highest possible speed, you don't want to be the first one on the brakes. You want to be it's complex, and I'm getting excited. Wait for Sunday. It'll be a great race.
If you want a good example of how that can turn out, and if there's something really on the line, go back and watch the start of the 2016 Mexican Grand Prix, and specifically watch Nico Rosberg and Max Verstappen. Nico obviously trying to protect the car, trying to protect his afternoon, and Max kind of doing Max things and barging his way through. So that's a good one. But you make a good point, because you go through start finish. Well, actually, if you come around turn 17, which is the end of the lap and where the pit entrance is, and you come on to start finish, that long run down to start finish all the way down into turn one, 90-degree corner to the right, then turns 2 and 3, 90 degrees to the left, and back 90 degrees to the right. Then you go down this run between turns 3 and 4, then 4, 5, and 6. Again, very short and snappy. And then you get through this kind of windy, fast sections between the turns 7 to 11. Not quite the same as it is between, was it turns 3 to 10 at Coda, which I really love the way that the cars really snap back and forth, and the way that they kind of the corners tight lower as you get through that series of corners at Coda before you go down into that sharp left-hander going to the straight there. But this too, like like you say, when you put into factor in like the grippiness and the slipperiness of the track, it is there's a little bit more going on there. And you look at the the track map and say, huh, is that it? But
Yeah.
prediction time. Do we now dare to go against Red Bull based on recent history, not just at the Mexican Grand Prix, but this season alone? I mean, just I couldn't help but thinking after that second safety car last week at the U.S. Grand Prix, had it happened 10 laps later, would have made like that finish in the race, I think, a little bit more exciting than it could have been. I mean, I think time at that point would have worked against Max a little bit more. I mean, at the end, I mean, it was Lewis did the best that he could to try and hold him off and retain and defend that lead. But I mean, there's no question between which is the faster and better car this year. It's not the Mercedes, it's the Red Bull. But I couldn't help but thinking afterwards that if that safety car for Lance and Fernando happened about lap 35 or 40 out of lap, was it 55 or 56 laps, how that might have changed the outcome of the race. Are you going to be different than me, or are you just going to
No.
take the easy way out and go with Red Bull for the 1-2
The easy
or
way
the
out is
podium?
that it's going to be a Red Bull dominant weekend. But the question is, does Sergio Perez get to enjoy and bask in the glory of winning a Formula One Grand Prix in his home
Yeah.
country where he is so greatly idolized? And earlier this week, Max Verstappen made some comments indicating that there's absolutely no priority shift within that organization, within that team, that they will continue to do everything possible to put Max Verstappen in a position to win. And obviously, a lot of the speculation since Max wrapped up that World Drivers title is, would they do things differently that might put Sergio in a more favorable position to win a Grand Prix? Doesn't sound like that's going to be the case. So if Sergio is going to win this race and enjoy the glory of winning a Mexican Grand Prix, he's going to have to earn it on merit, which means that he's going to have to qualify really well so he can get a great jump off the grid, avoid the chaos at T1 and T2 and T3, and hopefully put some distance between him and the rest of the field. But given the fact that Max knows this track so intimately, given the fact that he's raced so well this year, and given the fact that that package is
Yep.
just unstoppable, I don't see any reason why they don't dominate unless one, there's an unexpected collision between them and another car, or
Hmm.
maybe that ultra high altitude has an impact on the power unit and the aerodynamics in ways that we can't yet predict. But I think the
Yep.
smart money is on maybe not a 1-2, but Red Bull scoring a couple of podium finishes at this Grand Prix.
Yeah, I have to wonder too, possibly what Ferrari is going to, what their say in this race is going to be, because I think that last weekend at the U.S. Grand Prix was they didn't represent what they were fully capable of. I mean, they should have had a front row lockout, but of course, I mean, they did technically. But then Charles gets demoted halfway down the grid because grid penalties for various changes to equipment and parts on his car, and then Carlos being punted off and in turn one by George Russell, and then retiring his car at the end of lap one. I mean, Charles, I mean, full respect to him. I mean, he drove an incredibly good race to take it from 12th to get onto the podium. But I mean, had Charles not been demoted down to 12th for the start of that race, and had Carlos not been knocked out of the race on the very first lap, makes me wonder how they would have done. I mean, of course, hindsight is 2020, and we can sit here and speculate and kind of guess and talk about what Ferrari would have done last week at Coda. But I think that they've got a lot to race for. I know that the championships are wrapped up, but this I can't help but feeling is a season that slipped through Ferrari's fingers. And I think that just from a pride point of view, that they want to finish strong and win some races and score, and record some poles and front row lockouts and just max out the remainder of the season to just get something. You know what I mean, Hammy?
You know, it's funny you bring that up because I was thinking about this earlier today that this was really the championship that Ferrari let get away. And 2 months ago, I was super invested in the notion that Ferrari let this championship get away. But as the championships continued, I don't really believe that Ferrari had a legitimate shot at either the
Oh, you've
constructors
moved
or the
away from that,
drivers
have you?
title. I very much have. And like I said two
Yeah.
months ago, that was my opinion that Red Bull is great, but Ferrari was also equally as great. But all of their indis- kind of strategic indiscretions cost them this championship. I just don't think they have a package that can compete with Red Bull this year, and Red Bull was going to win this championship. Ferrari hung around. They probably should have hung around longer, but they were never going to be able to compete for this championship.
One thing that I've sort of been let bounce around on the inside of my empty mind is the question that did Ferrari like is there problems because we've seen them let's say I'm trying to articulate this. Did they sort of artificially inflate their own chances and our opinions of them because they just ran these cars to the absolute max? And because we talked about this like very early into the season about the amount of like different engine components and ices and turbochargers and this and that the Ferrari were going through, like they were going out of fashion, like every single bit on the car that could be
Great
replaced.
call. Great
And they
call.
they were just, so I mean the car was obviously competitive, but I think they were just pushing it to the absolute extreme. And we saw these cars retire for mechanical reasons, and then like you say, their own strategic and tactical blunders along the way, which probably got more highlights and probably got more of the focus and more of the discussion about. But maybe just the fact that they push the car beyond its capabilities is something that we just haven't talked about enough. Oh, you're nodding your head. It's obviously that this is
Dude,
the part of the.
we're an hour
Yeah, it's just
40 in. I'm done. I'm done. Let's pack it up.
all right. I know that look when the eyes glaze over. It's like we're coming up to our maximum time. It's just like it's a nodding look, and it's just like Hammy just wants to get out and call it a night. All right. Well, that actually is a good place to do it. Wasn't exactly the way I was expecting to shut this one down, but point taken. I got the hint. I'll look for the closing music here, and so as we do each and every time this week, you like to make a little bit of reminder to everyone, and then while you do that, I'll find the
Yeah,
closing
yeah,
music
yeah. Of
so we
course, of
could we
course.
could get out of here with a little bit of dignity.
If you
or
like what
something.
you hear, and I plead, but if you like what you hear and you listen to us on Spotify, if you can give us a rating, it means the world to both of us. And if you listen via the Apple ecosystem, if you can give us a rating and a review, that would be amazing. We cracked the 100 review mark recently, which was a big milestone for both of us, and we were both very, very, very happy about that. And of course, if you'd like to give us a follow on Twitter and get updates primarily about the show, we don't really use F1 Twitter, or we don't really use our Twitter account to share opinions and get into arguments and rant and rave. It's more just like, hey, here's what we're doing. Here's some updates. Let's have some fun. You can always follow us at Skid Area F1 Pod. We'd love to see you there. And if you do follow us, we make sure we follow everyone back and try to build a relationship, because it's really good to see what our listeners are up to, what you're interested in, what you're following, what you're saying, because it helps inform the way that we approach and develop our show as well.
Absolutely. And just before we go, I want to give a big shout out to all our tweeps that joined in the Spaces chat. Also, our very loyal friends that join in on the YouTube live stream each and every week. Always wonderful to see all the regulars again. And of course, if you want to get in on the email, send us an email at scooteryf1pod@gmail.com. And that's it. I've got nothing else. Hammy's got nothing else. He's already packing up. He's already halfway out to his car. So on that note, enjoy the Mexican Grand Prix. We'll see you again on Sunday night for the post-race recap. And until then, enjoy the weekend, enjoy the race,